We talked a little bit about some of the components of what a strategic planning system is all about.
And one of the things that we believe that is very important is for us to take a look at the respective environments that we operate in.
So today we're going to learn about personality, the differences of personalities, and about relationships.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to those who are here and welcome to those who are watching on the internet. I'm Melanie Cohen, and we're here for our monthly OCIO learning session. Today we have with us Dr. Linda Smith from the University of Maryland University College, and she's going to be talking about a fascinating topic, which is personal power. A lot of us, we think we know something about power, but we really don't understand our own personal power, and she's going to be here explaining it to us today. So let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Smith, because as you know, for those who watch every month or come every month, I have a personal connection to each of the speakers. So you have seen she has a very distinguished bio, both in academics, in terms of working with non-governmental organizations, in terms of publishing, in terms of working with international clients. The one thing you have not seen in her bio is that she is a yoga instructor, and so, which is very interesting because I had the opportunity to be in her class the other week because she wanted to show me how she integrates yoga into the class. And I thought that that was a tremendous experience. It helped me in many ways kind of relax a little bit, and then even myself realize that, I'm maybe not as young as I used to be, trying to hold some of those poses. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Linda Smith. Linda?
Yes, well, thank you, Melanie, and thank you for being with us. I have been thinking about researching, writing about, thinking some more about, talking about aspects of personal power for 20 years. So it's really important to me professionally, as well as in my own personal, professional journey in my career. So before starting into talking about the elements of personal power and how you can recognize it in yourself and in others, I'd like to say what I'm not going to do today. Because I think that ties into exerting my personal influence or power in a hopefully nice way. I am not here to flack a book. I am not here to sell you my professional services. I am really here to have as thoughtful a conversation as we could have around power and influence, perhaps why we don't talk much about it, perhaps more of how we could exert it, whatever we can do to grow this kind of discussion and awareness of who we are, what we value, and how we show up in seeking to influence others about things we care about. And that really is some of what personal power. So it is the ability to influence or change things to something that you really want, what's desired. Now that sounds very simple, doesn't it? But it isn't. So one of the things that makes it more complicated is that power is. And what do I mean by that? Power is within you, and then it depends on your awareness of it. Power is within others, and it depends on their individual awareness factors. So if all of that's true and we get together, it then becomes pretty complicated. And the other thing that is quite true that actually Machiavelli discovered and wrote about in his advice to the prince, and that is power will always be. People's interactions will fill in. And in a very competitive society like ours, people move quickly into competition and sometimes just simply view it as achievement. I want to achieve, I want to be successful. So let me see what else I've got that I can bring to our attention. The sources of these ideas, because I'm an academic, I always have to start with where was the research before this? It's what academics do. So in the 50s, there was some really important research that, and as much as we attend to power discussions in management classes, we use a model of power that's got about 5 categories in it. One of them is positional authority. If you work in a bureaucracy, then you know positional authority very well because it's at the center of what you must work with in order to be successful as a professional. But there is another category in the very popular original research from the 50s, and that is coercive power. And that's the power that we fear, which is in part some of the reason that we don't talk about how do we stay aware and tap the resources of our personal power. So there is a field of professionals called the OD professionals, organizational development professionals, and they are often on the margins of strategic planning and development. They're very talented people, but they have to work very hard, and in order to be successful, OD professionals must understand and tap not only various kinds of power, but particularly their own personal power. So a couple of these people have written about it too, and I'm fans of theirs, so I wanted to mention them. And then finally, you have a little bit of my story. I have had a professional practice along with a wonderful woman named Valerie Graff, in which we learned how to do ethnographic research. It's simply getting people to tell their life histories, their biographies, the stuff we really want to do over a cup of coffee when we have real conversation. And then because I'm a qualitative researcher, I've just learned how to have skill in organizing that so it's thoughtful. So that's really what ethnographic research is, and I've been in it for 10 years. All right, let's go a little further. So, now, why won't this work a little further? Why won't it? You know, I'm going to leave that to you to work on because I am not tech gifted, and I'm just going to talk. And those slides will catch up with us in just a minute. So I've mentioned a couple of the power categories. Positional power, or the power of authority, we see that in symbols, and we pay attention to it mostly in our informal conversations. So some of that positional authority in symbols is having the corner office, or having a designated parking space, or being able to wear a name badge or a lanyard. We have those in the government, don't we? And I never have one when I walk in as a visitor into bureaucracy, so I'm a little bit aware of that as a professional. Oh, thank you for finding how to make that work.
I just wanted to, we're both academics. We can discuss very complicated models. We just don't know how to use the
I got it.
Okay, so
Thank
now we're
you.
good.
Thank
Now
you,
we're
Matt.
good.
We're very good.
Now we're good.
We're going to be good anyway. There's also the power of knowledge, becoming an expert. And many of us, as we seek to advance in our professional careers, especially in government agency life, we go and earn a master's, maybe 2 masters, who knows, maybe 3 masters. But all of those are about having symbols of expert power, finding a particular niche for what you can contribute, and having embedded cultural recognition around the value of expert knowledge, power. There's also the power of money, there's the power of celebrity, all of those work too. But what is it about personal power that makes the difference? It is a power that you know makes connections with others. It is also coming from a deeper understanding of yourself. And for me, there's a story there. For me, even though I researched this for 20 years, it wasn't until about 12 years ago that I became a really serious practitioner of yoga. And yoga is all about the union of body, mind, and spirit. And I began to observe my yoga practice. And as I observed that, I found that there were new ideas about what was the core part of me, what I really wanted to do. Now, you would say, well, why is that important? Because we live in a society that we're taught and we're trained to be very confident of what we are to do. And that's the mode of operation. But the reality is, for some of us, especially for some of us who come from the margin of what is the stereotype or the archetype or the symbol that we hold of what is the successful leader, we still, as a larger society, hold that it's a white man. And so my guess is that in the wider audience for this today, and certainly right here face to face, we are a group of women. And we have understood for a long time that in exerting power, even if we are the head of, who was the woman who wrote the Lean In book?
Sheryl Sandberg.
Right, thank you, I knew you'd know her. Even if we're Sheryl Sandberg, that there's parts of this that we hold about how we should be behaving when we're exerting power. So that can separate people from really exploring what is inside and what's essentially really, really important to you. But if you practice yoga long enough, I'm here to testify that you do find those pieces of yourself, and that others have written about it in very profound ways, including the wonderful philosopher Martin Buber in the big theme of I, Thou. So, but the other important part is understanding that power, when you're really working well with your personal power and you're working well with the personal power of others, that it is truly a win-win and not a zero-sum activity. So let me go a little further. So because this is big and because it is abstract, I want to focus in on three aspects that have shown up over and over again in this 10 years of ethnographic research, and listening to the stories of people whose leadership, particularly their positional authority or their referent power, that's the kind of power you get just because people really respect you. There's something about you that is so compelling. And one of the people that holds that power in the world today is Nelson Mandela. So that gives you a sample of that. But it's then how to get into this very abstract but very important and often very internal set of dynamics. So I've got three categories or three buckets: visibility, an expanded sharing of information, and really holding awareness of establishing and building credibility. So, have I done it again? No, I'm still with the technology, so that's good. So in talking about visibility, that was the easiest one for us to discover in our research, the research I did with Valerie and listening to hundreds of stories of emergent leaders. So visibility, and I think visibility is easier for all of us. So let's begin there. And it's the things we know how to do. It's tactical in many ways. It's being present at meetings. It's asking questions at meetings. It's networking both with technology and face-to-face. So, but that is tactical. And there is a deeper level of visibility that I want you to spend some time, because it relates back to knowing what's really important to you, what's really at the core of your own deep interests, your own personal power. So that needs to be made visible too. And so how do you do that? By looking at the category of visibility. Well, you expand that definition so that it's beyond just the tactics of being visible. And it's no longer glib. It is a kind of visibility that really comes from things that you believe are important. You don't withhold those. You speak those. You make them visible. It's about using values easily. It's about also recognizing, showcasing, applauding the great ideas from others so that there's more visibility about the common ground. So, common ground about really important ideas and respect for everyone who can come to the table to talk about those ideas, which gets me to my next category. More sharing of information. And I've got lots of words here, but I've got a particular point I want to make, and that is and be prepared to share information that's beyond sound bites and make the room for that in conversation. Be brave. Become a storyteller. Because it is in telling our stories, making the place for that, that we reveal the embedded aspects of culture. And we don't do near enough with culture. And so when newcomers come into a work unit, they wander around in the forest of stuff for maybe months, and maybe they even have a disastrous experience and walk away from what they could contribute to that workplace because they don't understand enough of how things happen, enough of the culture. But if we tell more stories, then that is expanded information, and the values of the culture over time become visible. I see myself pounding the table a little bit here. I'm a preacher at heart, so just understand that if I get passionate about this, that's okay, and you can calm me down, Melanie. All right, so my third bucket. I'm not very good at this, am I?
Well, just go ahead and
I'm just going to talk. That's the best thing for me anyway. The third bucket is really about building credibility. So you and I'm sure I just unclicked that some way or another, but you and I know a lot about credibility, and it's very simple in some ways. It is just stepping forward to say what you can do and then doing it. And then over time, credibility leads to trust. And that's really what we're after in this bucket. But I think there's more you can think about in terms of credibility. It is not only stepping forward to say what you do and can do and then follow through on it. It is coming into those offers with a calmness of mind, so that it doesn't seem glib or overpromising. It truly is suggesting, signaling the trust potential ahead. So of the third category, credibility is more connected to trust than some of the others. So those are my three buckets. And you think I can find my last slide?
We'll try.
We'll try. There it is. One of my favorite questions or comments. He controls other, I could say she, who controls others may be powerful, but she or he who has mastered himself or herself is mightier still. Nice words some long time ago, words that continue to make a difference today. So I'm going to check my time, Melanie. And what I want to do before we get into some questions that you have and others I hope have, I want to tell a story. It is one of the centerpiece stories that came out of this 10 years of research, and it brings forward these three categories. It's Jane's story. Jane was a mid-career professional, an academic like I am, and she understood and was very successful in her academic research, and she delighted in the mission of her science research. She was a scientist, and she saw it as just the mission was discovery, to discover more and more of what knowledge we could bring and make the world a better place. But like many of us, she wanted to advance her career and didn't see how she could do that easily in her academic environment. So she looked around and interviewed and got a job in a quasi-government agency. So she lived here in the Washington area. Jane's very real. And she interviewed for this job. And so she quickly got in the interview with the executive director that she would report to the executive director and that she would be responsible for strategy, policy, and practices that would advance the area of science that she's very committed to. But the work at hand would be strategic. And so when she told her story to me that day, she said, I got it. I got that what I really needed to do in this agency was to present strategy and to be able to follow through on it in a way that allowed my sector to grow. So when you start talking about growth, then if you're smart as a professional manager, you think, well, what are the resources? So then in the first 6 weeks of being the new kid on the block, the new director, she discovered something she did not want to discover. She discovered the budget process, and that the executive director really was hands-off in that budget process. And further, that the budget director held his cards close to his chest. And then, which was already public information, she began to think very seriously about her program sector and realized it was the smallest, and she had a big job ahead. So she did what many people do. She pondered it. She had some sleepless nights over it. She spent time, as much time as she possibly could, with anything that she thought she could possibly do over in the physical area of the budget department. She called those drive-bys. She did that a lot. But she wasn't getting anywhere. Along the way of her drive-by, she found a couple of administrative people who were friendly and thoughtful, and she had coffees with them and had conversations. And from that, she got information that the budget director probably wanted some recognition for his job, that he saw setting the budget for this agency is incredibly important. And never mind that he was very withholding about the process, definitely not transparent, but that he really had a commitment to the process. So she took that in. Now, here's something else to know about Jane. Jane had not only been very successful in her academic endeavors in promoting research, but she had been very successful in her professional association and was actually had been the president of the association, currently served on their board of directors. So one night, in the middle of the night, she got it. She woke up with the idea that she would do her best to get the budget director into a keynote presentation at the upcoming professional association meeting. And she did, but she did more. She organized it so that they flew out together, hour-and-a-half plane ride, you know, arm to arm, close together. We all are in the economy section of the plane. And, but she did even more than that. She allowed for people in this association to tell the stories and speak for the whole community of the possibility in this science research area. So she had him meet and greet wonderful new professionals just coming into the field. She had him spend time over dinner with people who were experts and had all kinds of interesting projects going on. And he had a good time in his presentation too. So the plane ride back, another hour and a half. They get on, they're a little tired, but somehow they get into talking about how it went. And he responded that it was very interesting. He learned a lot. He learned some things that he just hadn't thought about before. And just as they're getting ready to land, he says, "Would you like to write an addendum to your budget?" She did. She's grown that section in a wonderful way. And in this, as you listen to the words and telling her story, you will find aspects of visibility, you will find expanded information sharing, and you will find credibility. It's up to you to find those things. So that's what I have to share, Melanie.
Okay, well,
I'm ready for you and any question.
sure. Well, I can always come up with a question, but we're going to see if there's some audience questions first. If we don't see anybody, heading to the microphone immediately, I've got a couple questions. So, okay. People are already
Great.
running to the microphone. Perfect.
Good, I like that.
Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I think my question, you said so much, so it's almost hard to form what I want to say, but in this setting or in this context here in this federal government organization, and you mentioned such a paradigm shift of the concept of power and personal power, what would your recommendation be to younger professionals with this hierarchical structure in terms of leveraging their personal power when there is a culture of almost stifleness that it's okay, I have seniority, I have the title. How do we convey that we have power when we're not able to actually implement it?
Right. Right. Well, Melanie's commenting here, and I second
Excellent
it.
question. Excellent.
It is a wonderful, wonderful question, and I'm going to give you an answer and hope that we all think a little bit more about it, because I think it's such an important question. I think it is my job as a person. I think it's also the responsibility of your supervisor or others who have 5-7 years of work experience to look around, to constantly be looking around for the newcomers, because newcomers come with the latest information, they come with enthusiasm, they come with curiosity, and those are great resources for a manager to have around a work project that probably is not fully staffed or may make use of more resources. And guess what? Young professionals are willing to bring those resources in. So part of it is setting up some informal structure in which there's more invitation to younger professionals. Maybe it could even be as simple as having a coffee time together where we talk about discoveries, and there's one-on-one special invitation to young professionals. I think some of this has to come from the people who are not now but were young professionals. So that's one of my answers. Melanie, you want to add something?
I don't necessarily have an answer, but I had an additional question to that question.
Okay.
Because that's kind of what I had written here. In a bureaucracy, we're all in bureaucracies, and I think it's very difficult now being in the federal government because it's a tough situation now. And you have a lot of controls. You sometimes have supervisors who are unwilling to relinquish control. And you have people with good ideas, but sometimes those good ideas are threatening to other people. And so if you're in an environment like that, it's difficult to feel as if you have power. And so I guess my question there would also be, are there a lot of internal, personal sort of techniques that you can take within yourself to create power for yourself when you don't feel like you have it in that environment?
I've got two answers, and they're very different. The first answer is one that's more internal. And remember my yoga story? I would encourage everyone to practice yoga. There is something about a practice that allows you to learn from the wisdom of your body. That's what the poses do. That leads you into different and more important, more valuable insights about yourself, so that you hold a deeper, different awareness of yourself. And with that ongoing, deeper awareness, then when your boss doesn't recognize you, you can recognize yourself. You can empower yourself. I don't like that word, empower, because we've used it so that it doesn't have a lot of meaning, but here it does have meaning. It's around holding awareness. But there's another tactic that you want to take, and it's in Jane's story. It's being patient and listening more deeply and finding out where the people who you do answer to, what are their interests. So in Jane's story, she finally discovered that the budget director really wanted to tell his story of the importance of the budget process for this government, quasi-government agency. And he'd had very few venues for telling that story. And once she started working with that, she could in turn open up, he opened up. And then there was more room, there was more of a playing field for both of them. So when you feel that you're in a dead end, and I know those terrible dead ends, I know them well, then it's also the place to say, what can I do to find a new way to listen? And what can I do in listening to mine what's there? So that's the other part of it, Melanie.
Okay, I think there were some other audience questions.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm not that tall. So thank you, and thank you, Melanie, Dr. Cohen. So power is a very powerful word, but culturally can be viewed differently. So what suggestions would you recommend to help build the bridge to a more cohesive, collaborative image of what power means, right? So as you mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, that normally power was a stereotype of a white male. We are a country of very diverse communities, opinions. How would you cross that line and not have it be seen as, so if a male is strong and aggressive, or take charge, a woman is viewed as being, she's aggressive and she's very emotional and she's not listening. But if a man does it, it's okay. And then you cross and you expand that boundary to what that woman looks like here in your audience. We probably have 6 or 7 different stereotypes or cultures or diversity or ethnicities or powers, cultures, religions, whatever the case is. How would you recommend or suggest in building that bridge to a commonality?
Oh, there's an easy one.
There is I can tell you have thought about that, and I thought about lots of those things too, lots of those things. There's several different ways to take the parts of your question. So one of the parts is around how do we bring the differences that we really do have and use them as resources and not just revert to a stereotype. I see you shaking your head, and I know I've found a chord. What we do is tied to the expanded sharing of information. We put extra effort and thought into how can we build examples and anecdotes that provide a more whole way of understanding such a complex thing as power. And when you tie the stories together from different viewpoints, what you then do are two things. Both I just love as a qualitative researcher. But you string together and make visible the differences, and they begin to take on a luminescent quality. They are empowered in themselves. But you're also able, like pearls on a necklace, the wire that holds the necklace or the string that holds the necklace together becomes stronger. And so you have that core of a working definition for what power is in this particular work project or work group. I hope that makes some sense to you. But I want to talk about one more thing because I think it's in this. And I tried to get into talking with Melanie about it before we started this session today. And that is, we do have a very dominant stereotype around what exertion of power should be. And it really is the white guy, you know, it's Don in the Mad Men. You know, that's just it, and it still is. So, what happens to women when they try to be more like that, even when inside they feel different? Or what happens to Latinos, or what happens to African Americans, or what happens to Asian Americans, when because of cultural backgrounds, how our families brought us up with hope and promise, and wanting to honor those things that we learned in our childhoods about culture. What happens when that culture is really different? I think we bury it. I think we bury that important culture that we came from, unless we don't do the work of looking at core values and do that consistently. But I think another thing happens to that. When we separate what's really important to us from the way we think we ought to be in a meeting, then other people pick up on that, and that diminishes our power. So that's a real conundrum, isn't it? We've got these standard ways of behaving, and we know that that's not consistent with the way we want to show up. So I come back to doing that work that you can do on a daily basis, certainly on a very frequent basis, in which you stay aware of who you are, no matter what the pressures are outside you. But that you also, in looking at it, create the space for examples and anecdotes, because that's an amazing something. You have to be brave the first couple of times to ask to tell the story, because after all, we don't have enough time and we need to have our metrics lined up. We know those drills, don't we? We know that lingo. But we as humans love stories. And we gain so much, just like the pearls on the necklace, from the storytelling. And then that allows us to have not only different perspectives at the same time, but the wire or the string through the pearls of the necklace to hold a concept of power application together. Now, aren't you glad you asked that question? Other questions?
Well, let's see if there's a follow-up. Did you have a follow-up? Oh, there.
Oh,
okay.
good.
Okay.
I want to monopolize the question time. But in looking at your closing, this quote, which is just powerful in and of itself, and attending events such as this, and that HUD often has these educational forums outside of our work. Right. And I'm reflective on, if we look around today, the attendance seems to always be minimal. And incorporating your concept of power, how do we, this quote, it's about, personal reflection, and that it's not just utilizing power, but it's knowing yourself. How do we try to convey that or instill that in staff and people to realize that you're just as effective in your job when you pair that in tandem with having all these education opportunities, building yourself personally, and it just seems to be such a opposing, for whatever reason, force that we get so entrenched in what we have to do that we don't look outside of our silo. So I wonder your perspective for both of you.
Well, there's a lot in that question.
There is. If you don't mind, if I could just say one thing before you get started while you're formulating the response. We were talking about this exact topic just before we got started. And I was saying, there may not be a lot of people in the audience, but it's not that important really, because a lot of people watch on the internet. And this isn't really about the training you need at your desk every day. These kind of educational opportunities are really about people growing as individuals and people living within the organization and the environment and their context and thinking in new ways. And if you leave this session and it has changed your mind in any way about how you think about yourself, how you think about your work, how you think about your life, how you think about the organization, how you think about other people, that's an enormous impact. And there just has to be that understanding the difference between training for a task and learning for life. And what these kind of educational opportunities offer is that learning for life. Because what you gather from this, you take anywhere you go. You know, and that's really kind of the key. I don't want to take away any of the thunder of what you have. You speak from the expertise. I'm kind of talking from the whole idea of what learning is about.
Well, thank you, Melanie. I very much appreciate you talk about it in terms of learning for life. When I did my doctoral research work at Columbia University, a huge theme of that was what I called really important learning that matters. And it's learning in life and about life and through life, learning through lived experience. So thanks for bringing that up into the conversation, because that distinguishes a session like this from a training session. And training sessions have their places. After all, I could benefit from a little bit more training on how to use technology. But I want to get back to your question, because again, it's another thoughtful one. And the phrase I wrote down was showing up powerful in a setting in which younger professionals, the culture at first glance doesn't recognize the power of those interactions. But if you think about the three categories I spoke to, visibility that is not glib, but at an intentional level, sharing information that is wider, particularly in using examples and fuller, it has the setting and context, which in turn, over time, reveals culture that nobody talks about. And the one about building credibility, those three categories or buckets, those are actually dynamics. So when you individually start becoming more aware of what you could do in your conversations professionally on work projects to incorporate some of those principles, that others are going to see you differently. They see you differently. So that's in Jane's story. Jane used those principles, and the budget director on the plane ride back, out of his experience, not just from Jane, but aligned with all of the many different people he met who filled out an image, a powerful image of the possibility of this area of science. There was expanded information sharing, and so he could see things differently. He saw Jane differently. So it begins to happen. Now, how do I know that? You know, just not telling you, you could be a little cynical here. It's such a good news story. But it's through that 10 years of research. So in looking at emerging leaders, people who were grappling with how do they climb the ladder of their professional success, however they defined that, they were either being challenged by these three categories, for example, not being visible enough and assuming that they were visible, or they were getting some of these qualities and wanted to talk about where their successes were. So this is grounded in hundreds of stories that point to the fact that these three categories, as I've described them, are very dynamic. And when I, as an individual, start using those categories, then others informally, perhaps even subconsciously, begin to pick up on some of it, including adopting some of these strategies, which is a great compliment, isn't it? So it starts happening, and it's the dynamic part of it. It's not all your responsibility, but others respond to you.
Okay.
That's
Are
a
there
lot,
other-
isn't it?
It's all a lot. It's all a lot because it's all so thought-provoking. I mean, it's not a light topic, so it's very thought-provoking. So is there another question? You need to go to the microphone.
Okay, great.
When you mentioned something about culture, it kind of struck a chord. Because, I mean, I get into a lot of philosophical questions with friends. It's like, where do you belong? I'm first generation immigrant. So part of the issue, I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, is like you live almost in two worlds. And so what I say is, I pick the best out of both. Okay? So I admire the fact that, you know, in Latin America, you go to, somebody says, show up at 2 o'clock. 4 o'clock is kind of cool to show up, right? So in the United States, if you say 2 o'clock, it is 2 o'clock. So it's like, it's a matter of like embracing what you have, you know, like family values, you know. My parents have been married for 50 some odd years, you know, and I expect that, you know, and I try to bring that to my kids. So I think, but that puts me in when you said the expectations of meeting at a certain level, I'm not willing to make sacrifices or changes. So when I talk to somebody, I don't care if I'm talking to the person who just came to pick up my trash, or I'm talking to somebody, you know, at the CIO, and sometimes, you know, it says, well, you shouldn't have said that. I'm like, why not? So it's an issue of kind of like breaking the barriers and basically learning, you know, some of the, just as I think, you know, but I'm having trouble striking that balance at this point. And,
Yes.
and it's you
What
know,
is
from
the
a
balance?
professional, exactly, from a professional standpoint, it's like I'm having trouble striking that balance.
Right.
How do I go about it?
Right. Balance is forever going to be a challenge, and it is part of why I continue to spend a lot of time thinking about what I've learned in this research and continue to collect stories and continue to mull it over, both on my own personal, professional experiences as well as those that I work with, and it seems to be important to them. We get into this conversation. I think we're going to continue to have finding balance, and I actually see the effort put in finding the balance as something that's a gift to us, and I don't mean that in a Pollyanna way. I mean that searching for the balance means that we continue to learn. And that keeps helping us to be open even when we might, if we really examined ourselves, if I really examined myself deeply, I might find a little area that's closed off and that needs to reopen. So balance is with us. I'm glad you named it. How do you, when you're coming and trying to hold two different worlds, really hold them and respect those two different worlds, the work world, which is very Anglo-Saxon, and the world at home, which is far more flowing and relational? I think part of what you can do is to look for places at work where there's the opportunity for bringing forward the relational grace. And so for me, that might mean really adding value to things that are not so directly in the strategic plan, but indirectly contribute enormous value. So it's adding skills at relationship because you have that embedded in you, to making a United Way campaign really meaningful, or making the next all-staff retreat just so special and respectful and having juice and liveliness in it. It's thinking a little bit more about what do I yearn for in my set of culture that I have personally, and knowing that clearly, and then just looking for where can I balance what needs to happen at work with what could be possible. And we don't know. We don't know that we can run a staff meeting differently. Maybe even give people 30 minutes, God forbid, 30 minutes lead time to come to the meeting. Because that was a part of your example, that the example was it's okay in Brazil if I want to show up at 4 o'clock and the meeting, we start gathering at 2 o'clock. That's really great because it gives people an opportunity to talk about other things. And who knows, in talking with each other in serendipity, who knows what we may discover? Who knows what goes untapped? That's a great gift of the Latin cultures. But we don't value that yet. We just need a little bit more learning. And in the meantime, yes, those of us who come aware of not being mainstream archetype, fitting into Don Draper's world, we carry an extra opportunity and an extra responsibility. It's how we're going to carry that, the balance. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if there's any other from the audience. If not from the audience, I have one. Okay, so let me ask you this. Changing the topic a little bit.
Okay.
When we talk about, I think today, in this day and age, there's so much technology that's going on, right? So we all blog, we all tweet, we all post our latest, meal on Facebook. We all do something. Okay, so, and I think there's a little bit of maybe perhaps a little narcissism in that. Right? Because who really cares what you're eating where, right? or what you're doing every minute of every day. So, but I think there's an impact of technology on personal power. So if we can, we just have the time for this last question. So if you can talk a little bit about that, what's the impact of technology on personal power?
I think technology, at least as I'm experiencing it as a latecomer, I'm not a 20-something, obviously. But technology, as I experience it, and as a person who's thought a lot about the use of personal power, I think technology is a really awesome barrier to the use of personal power. I think technology, because of the technical aspects of it, separate us from the use, from the full benefit of personal power. And it's a little bit like, Melanie and I both teach at the University of Maryland, and students beg for classes that are face-to-face. And I think the part of the reason they beg is they know that they're going to learn more fully. They're going to be able to exercise their good thinking more fully in a face-to-face situation. And part of the learning that's happening is a give and take of power, an exchange, a sharing of power. At least I think that's where real learning resides, and that might be a whole separate meeting for us to talk about. But technology, because it conditions us to put it into 140 characters or less, or it conditions us to say, just right off the thought of the top of your head without the context. So if you look at a bunch of tweets, it's very hard to see the story, isn't it? And what did I talk about as one of the essential things of using and exchanging personal power was the expanded information sharing, primarily through storytelling. So technology is going to need to show up differently for me to think about technology differently in terms of exercise of personal power.
Okay.
It's a contact sport.
Right, there you go. Okay. That's a good way to think about it, So, all right, I think with that, we're actually closing in on our time. So thank you very much, Linda, for being with us this hour. We appreciate it. I think we learned a lot here, and I think it gave us all something to think about. Great. So please join us next month, July 18th. We're going to be having a discussion on design thinking with Dr. Jeffrey Seaver from the National Defense University. So thank you all very much for attending, and have a wonderful day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Great questions.